that brings us to the next big question that we have. And Mark, you alluded to it in your comment just now, where I think people of an evangelical and Protestant mindset and upbringing are very familiar, especially in the United States, of the idea of denominations.
Right.
And so two questions that an unfamiliar person might ask, and I will ask in their stead, so to speak, are: one, is Orthodoxy not just a denomination of Christianity? And two, does Orthodoxy have denominations within it?
Sure. The short answer is no. The second answer is a little longer. I'll try to abbreviate it. But within Orthodoxy, you have jurisdictions, if you will. These jurisdictions are connected to the historic patriarchates. So either Constantinople, where the ecumenical patriarch is, or the Patriarchate of Antioch, again, where my patriarch is. And then you would have the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which did have a presence here in the United States at one point, until those churches that were once affiliated with the Patriarch of Jerusalem came under what they call the omniphora, or the discipline of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And then you have the Patriarchate of Alexandria, which works primarily in Africa. Yeah. Okay. And then you have what they call the junior patriarchates, which would be Moscow, and then you would have Serbia, Romania. I believe the Bulgarians would have their own patriarchate, and they have their own extensions or jurisdictions elsewhere in the world. At present, if I'm not mistaken, the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Moscow Patriarchate, again, you're looking at a historic patriarchate and then a junior patriarchate, right, are kind of in lockstep with having the largest number of jurisdictions under them, and the jurisdictions themselves are headed usually by an archbishop or a metropolitan. Now, the difference being is that if you are a self-ruled jurisdiction, you will most likely have a metropolitan. Okay? And by self-ruled, I mean that the original patriarchate has given you a certain amount of freedom to govern yourself where you are. So you can choose your own bishops, for example, ordain your own priests, you have your own seminaries, you don't have to send them, to the other side of the world, for example. The only thing you usually cannot do in a self-ruled archdiocese or jurisdiction is choose your own metropolitan. You can nominate candidates for metropolitan, but ultimately the patriarch will determine, and his synod will determine who the metropolitan will be. Now, if you're a member of a jurisdiction that does not have self-rule, but is still connected and under the authority of a patriarchate, like take, for example, the Greek Archdiocese here in the United States. It is not a self-ruled archdiocese. It is a jurisdiction that is directly under the authority of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So they don't have a metropolitan, they have an archbishop. Okay? And he answers to the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And then you have the newer phenomena, which is very popular in some parts of the world, of what they call autocephaly. These are churches that are completely independent. They were part of a patriarchate, but they were given self-rule, and then they were eventually given complete and total autonomy to be what they are, where they are. And the most popular example of this here in the United States is the Orthodox Church in America. They have their roots in the Russian Church, so their liturgy, their music, their whole tradition really is Russian. But they consider themselves an American church, and there's a lot of converts there as well. So, and English is the primary language of the liturgy. There, you don't hear a whole lot of Old Slavonic, for example, in the Orthodox Church in America. So, no, we don't have denominations. We don't have any breakaways, for example. Well, that's not entirely true. Yeah, no, we have groups that eventually leave over minor issues, such as maybe the calendar, which we'll talk about, right? The adoption of the Gregorian calendar for some part of the Orthodox liturgical calendar. Obviously not all. Some groups about 100 years ago left, and they became what they call old calendarists. And they're small groups. But that's pretty much it. We don't have any breakaway groups that would be analogous to something like the Protestant Reformation, right? I mean, denominationalism is a Protestant phenomena, right? So,
at the same time, Orthodoxy does not work like Roman Catholicism.
No.
Right.
No.
The churches they're interdependent, but they're independent of each other.
Yes.
The patriarch. So there's nobody that can tell another patriarch what to do. Even the ecumenical patriarch doesn't have any authority over any of those.
Right.
Only under his direct jurisdiction. Similar,
Yes.
similar, but not. It's not an exact correlation to the Archbishop of Canterbury and what used to be a functioning Anglican communion. He was the father of the family, but had no jurisdiction outside of the province of Canterbury.
Mm-hmm.
He's just a pivot, a hinge that's used to. And in Orthodoxy hasn't for centuries even gathered on a regular basis in the episcopate as much as Anglicanism has. They simply haven't for 300 years. So, and there's much ethnicity that drives Orthodoxy that's very difficult to explain to an American Protestant.
Yeah.
That they're very ethnic churches, and so while they would argue that, and I would argue too, that they have the same faith, almost the same liturgy, but they don't get along very well, and they can have lots of political turmoil.
Yeah, the reality of the nationalistic nature of modern Orthodox churches, it's undeniable, and we are kind of seeing that played out now on the geopolitical level, right, with things going on with Russia and whatnot. But even before, for example, Russia had gone into Ukraine, there was already a spat, if you will, going on between the Moscow Patriarchate and the Ecumenical Patriarchate over a group in Ukraine that was previously schismatic and heretical, and then the Ecumenical Patriarch came in and essentially made them Orthodox, so to speak, and replaced the canonical church in Ukraine, which was under Russia. So there's a whole lot of intrigue and innuendo going on there. But all of that plays to this unfortunate knack that Orthodox have for prioritizing their ethnicity over Orthodoxy, right? I mean, it doesn't negate the reality of the church, right, of the Orthodox Church. For the most part, even as Mark said correctly, I would agree, there are small variations in the liturgy, depending where you go, but they're small. They're minor. But we're not talking about a situation, for example, where, like say in Catholicism, where you go to most Roman Catholic churches and you're getting the Novus Ordo, and then if you really want to go to a Latin Mass or the old Roman Rite, you got to travel 30 miles, right? Yeah. Because it's a very different liturgy, right? There's nothing like that, right, going on. But I mean, I'll give you another example. For example, among Greeks and even Antiochians, right, confession has become something almost like the forgotten sacrament, right? But among the Russians, with the Slavs, it's ever present, and even the idea of being prescribed penance in confession is very present in the Russian tradition, where you don't see penance prescribed among Greek clergy or Antiochian clergy. It's very uncommon. It's very uncommon. So that's one of those little differences, right? Does it change the understanding of confession? No, not necessarily, right? It's still a necessary sacrament, even if it's underused and not entirely appreciated. But you certainly see a stricter, more austere understanding of the Christian life among Russians. Right? They're very serious. And to a certain degree, they've had to be serious because they had to survive.